The first thing Evangeline Sullivan noticed when her aunt pushed her toward the stranger was the smell of whiskey and tobacco that seemed to seep from his pores like rancid sweat. It was August 1881 in Knights Ferry, California, and the dust from the Stanislaus River Valley hung thick in the air, coating everything in a film of brown grit that matched the color of desperation clinging to her aunt's weathered face. "This here's my niece," Aunt Martha said, her voice carrying that false sweetness she always used when money was involved. "Pretty little thing, ain't she? Clean, obedient, knows how to cook and sew, worth every penny you're paying." Evangeline felt her stomach turn as the man, whose name she had learned was Samuel Pritchard, circled her like she was livestock at auction. He was perhaps 45, with gray threading through his beard and eyes that held no warmth whatsoever. His clothes spoke of money, a fine wool suit despite the heat, and gold rings on 3 of his fingers. He owned a series of boarding houses in San Francisco, her aunt had whispered earlier that morning, and was looking for a wife to manage his household and bear his children. "I did not agree to this," Evangeline said, her voice steady despite the trembling in her hands. She was 19 years old, and in the 3 years since her parents had died of fever, she had learned that her aunt viewed her as nothing more than a burden to be shed at the first opportunity. "You will do as you're told," Martha hissed, gripping Evangeline's arm hard enough to bruise. "I fed you, clothed you, kept a roof over your ungrateful head. This is how you repay me." Samuel Pritchard pulled out a leather wallet thick with bills. $500, as we discussed. The sum made Evangeline's breath catch. It was more money than most people in Knights Ferry saw in 2 years. Her aunt's eyes gleamed with greed as she reached for the bills, but before her fingers could close around them, a deep voice cut through the humid air. "I will give you 1,000. All 3 of them turned toward the speaker. He stood in the doorway of the general store where this transaction was taking place, tall and lean, with the kind of build that came from hard work rather than soft living. His hat shadowed his face, but Evangeline could see a strong jaw and eyes the color of storm clouds. He wore dusty denim and a faded blue shirt, working man's clothes, and a gun belt hung low on his hips. "Who the hell are you?" Samuel Pritchard demanded, his face reddening. The man stepped into the dim interior of the store, and Evangeline saw he could not be much older than 25 or 26. "Name's Kieran York. I have a ranch about 10 miles north of here. Been listening to this conversation, and I figure if we're treating human beings like cattle, I might as well make a bid." "This is a private matter," Pritchard sputtered, but Aunt Martha was already moving toward Kieran, her expression calculating. "You have $1,000, cash money?" Kieran reached into his vest and pulled out a roll of bills that made the amount Pritchard had offered look like pocket change. "Right here, and I will add another 200 for your trouble." Evangeline watched this exchange with a mixture of horror and fascination. Part of her wanted to scream, to run, to fight against being sold like a piece of property. But another part, the practical part that had kept her alive these past 3 years, recognized that if she had to belong to someone, the young cowboy with the steady hands might be preferable to the leering businessman with whiskey breath. "Now hold on just a minute," Pritchard protested, but Martha had already snatched the money from Kieran's hand, counting it with practiced speed. "The girl's yours," she announced, and just like that, Evangeline's fate was sealed. Kieran turned those gray eyes on her, and she saw something in them she had not expected. Kindness, perhaps, or at least not cruelty. "Miss, I have a horse outside. If you have belongings you need to collect, I suggest you get them now." Evangeline found her voice, though it came out smaller than she intended. "Why are you doing this?" "Because no woman deserves to be sold to a man like that," Kieran said simply, with a pointed look at Samuel Pritchard. "Now, do you have things to gather?" She nodded mutely. Her possessions fit into a single carpet bag, a sad collection of worn dresses, and the few items that had belonged to her mother. Within 10 minutes, she was standing outside the general store in the blazing afternoon sun, watching Kieran York saddle a beautiful chestnut mare. "Can you ride?" he asked. "Yes." Her father had taught her before he died, on better days when they had owned horses and land and hope. Good. It is a 2-hour ride to the ranch. We should leave before Pritchard decides to make trouble. Kieran swung up onto a gray gelding and offered his hand to help her mount the mare. His grip was firm and calloused, the hand of someone who worked for his living. They rode out of Knight's Ferry in silence, leaving behind the only home Evangeline had known for 3 years. The landscape rolled past in shades of gold and brown, oak trees providing occasional shade as they followed a rough trail north. The Stanislaus River glittered in the distance, a ribbon of precious water in the dry summer heat. After an hour, Kieran finally broke the silence. "I suppose you have questions?" "About 100, Evangeline admitted, adjusting her grip on the reins. The mare was well trained and responsive, better than any horse her aunt had owned. Starting with why you just spent $1,200 on a complete stranger. "I heard about what your aunt was planning about a week ago," Kieran said, his eyes scanning the horizon with the constant vigilance of someone used to potential danger. "Knight's Ferry is small enough that word travels. My ranch hand Tommy was in town and heard her bragging about the arrangement with Pritchard, talking about how she was finally going to be rid of her burden and have enough money to move to Sacramento." Shame burned through Evangeline, hot and bitter. "So you knew I was for sale and decided to add me to your property?" Kieran's jaw tightened. "Not exactly. I have seen what men like Pritchard do to young women. He has gone through 3 wives already. And rumor is they all died under suspicious circumstances. I could not stand by and let that happen to someone else." "So you bought me out of charity?" The words came out sharper than she intended, fueled by the humiliation of the entire situation. "I bought your freedom," Kieran corrected, his voice gentle but firm. "There is a difference." They rode in silence for another stretch, and Evangeline tried to process what he was saying. It made no sense. Men did not spend that kind of money without expecting something in return. She had learned that lesson well in the years since her parents' death. The ranch came into view as the sun began its descent toward the western hills. It was larger than she expected, a well-maintained house with a wide porch, several outbuildings, and corrals holding at least 24 horses. Beyond that, she could see cattle grazing in fenced pastures. This was not the property of a struggling cowboy. This was a successful operation. "You said you were a ranch hand," she said slowly as they approached. "No, I said I had a ranch. You assumed I was a hand." There was no smugness in his tone, just a statement of fact. A young man emerged from the barn as they rode up, his face breaking into a wide grin. "Boss, you actually did it. Tommy thought you were crazy, but I figured you would follow through. Daniel, this is Miss Evangeline Sullivan. Miss Sullivan, this is Daniel Carter, one of my hands. Is Tommy around?" "Out checking the fence line on the western section. Should be back before dark." Daniel tipped his hat to Evangeline. "Pleased to meet you, miss. I will take care of the horses." Kieran dismounted and moved to help Evangeline down, his hands respectful as they steadied her. "Come inside. You must be thirsty, and we need to talk." The interior of the house was surprisingly comfortable, with sturdy furniture and clean floors. A woman in her 50s appeared from what looked like a kitchen, wiping her hands on an apron. "Mrs. Chen, this is Evangeline Sullivan. She'll be staying with us. Could you prepare the guest room, please?" The older woman's eyes were sharp and assessing, but not unkind. "Of course, Miss Sullivan, there's water for washing in the basin, and I will have supper ready within the hour." When they were alone in what appeared to be a sitting room, Evangeline finally let herself look at Kieran York properly. He had removed his hat, revealing dark brown hair that needed cutting, and a face that was more rugged than handsome, but striking in its honest strength. He was watching her with an expression she could not quite read. "What happens now?" she asked, deciding directness was her best option. "What do you expect from me in exchange for what you paid?" Kieran settled into a chair and gestured for her to take the sofa. "Nothing. Nothing." She repeated the word flatly, not believing it for a second. "I bought you out of that situation because it was wrong. What happens next is entirely up to you." He leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "You can stay here as long as you need. Mrs. Chen can use help with the household work if you want to earn your keep, but that is your choice. If you want to leave, I will give you enough money to get wherever you want to go and start fresh." Evangeline stared at him, searching for the trap, the hidden expectation, the real price. But his gray eyes remained steady and sincere. "I do not understand." "My mother was in a similar situation once," Kieran said quietly, "before she met my father. She was sold by her stepmother to a farmer who wanted a workhorse more than a wife. My father was passing through, saw what was happening, and intervened. They fell in love eventually, but he always said the most important thing he did was give her a choice. The choice to stay or go, to accept his courtship or refuse it. She chose to stay, and they had 30 good years together before the cholera took them both last winter." The grief in his voice was real and raw. Evangeline felt something shift in her chest, a small crack in the wall she had built around herself. "I am sorry for your loss. Thank you." He straightened, and some of the sadness cleared from his expression. "My point is, I know what it is like to watch someone you love struggle with the powerlessness of not having choices. I will not do that to another person. So you have options, Miss Sullivan. You can stay here and work if you want. You can rest and recover from what your aunt put you through. Or you can take my offer of money and leave. All I ask is that you take a few days to decide. You have been through an ordeal, and decisions made in shock rarely turn out well." It was the most reasonable, kind offer anyone had made her in 3 years. Evangeline felt tears prick at her eyes, but she blinked them back. She had learned not to cry where others could see. "Why would you do this for a stranger?" "Because someone did it for my mother. Because it is the right thing to do. And because—" He paused, a faint smile touching his lips. "You looked like you were about to knife Pritchard yourself if given the opportunity. I have respect for that kind of spirit." Despite everything, Evangeline found herself smiling back. "I was considering it. Thought so. You have your mother's fire in you, I imagine." "You did not know my mother?" "No. But I know the look of someone who refuses to break no matter how hard the world pushes. You have that look." He stood, moving toward a cabinet and pulling out a bottle and 2 glasses. "Mrs. Chen does not approve, but I figure today warrants a drink. Do you partake?" "Not usually, but today I will make an exception." He poured 2 small measures of amber liquid and handed her one. "To new beginnings and better choices." They drank, and the whiskey burned its way down her throat, harsh and cleansing at the same time. Evangeline coughed slightly, and Kieran grinned. "My father's recipe, he always said anything worth drinking should remind you that you are alive." "It certainly does that." She set the glass down carefully. "Mr. York, I need you to understand something. I appreciate what you did today, truly, but I have learned not to trust easy kindness. People always want something." "Fair enough. You do not know me from Adam, and you have no reason to trust me. So how about this? You stay for a week. Watch how things work here. Get to know the people. See if I am lying about my intentions. At the end of the week, if you want to leave, I will personally escort you anywhere you want to go with enough money to start over. If you decide to stay, we can discuss terms of employment or whatever arrangement makes you comfortable. Deal?" It was more than fair. It was generous beyond reason. Evangeline studied his face, looking for signs of deception, but found only earnest sincerity. Against her better judgment, she found herself nodding. "Deal. But I will earn my keep. I am not a charity case. Would not dream of suggesting you were." Kieran extended his hand, and after a moment's hesitation she shook it. His grip was warm and firm, the handshake of equals rather than master and servant. Mrs. Chen called them to supper shortly after, and Evangeline found herself at a table with Kieran, the housekeeper, and the 2 ranch hands, Tommy and Daniel. Tommy was older, perhaps 50, with the bow-legged walk of a man who had spent his life on horseback. Daniel was young and eager, probably not more than 20. They treated her with respect and courtesy, and no one asked prying questions about how she had come to be at the ranch. The food was simple but excellent: beef and beans and fresh bread that Mrs. Chen had baked that morning. Evangeline ate more than she had in weeks, her appetite returning with the first real sense of safety she had felt since her parents died. After supper, Mrs. Chen showed her to a small but comfortable room on the second floor. It had a real bed with clean sheets, a washstand with a pitcher of fresh water, and a window that looked out over the darkening landscape. "Mr. York is a good man," Mrs. Chen said as she set a lamp on the bedside table. "He took me in when my husband died, and I had nowhere to go, never asked anything in return except that I help around the house. You can trust him, Miss Sullivan." "I hope you're right," Evangeline said softly. That night, she lay in the comfortable bed and stared at the ceiling, processing everything that had happened. 12 hours ago, she had been living under her aunt's roof, subject to the woman's cruel whims and petty tyrannies. Now she was in a stranger's house, but that stranger had shown her more kindness in an afternoon than her aunt had in 3 years. She thought about Kieran York with his steady gray eyes and his talk of choices and freedom. He was handsome in a rough-hewn way, she admitted to herself, but more than that, he seemed genuinely decent, which meant he was either an exceptional liar or possibly the first truly good person she had encountered since her father died. Time would tell which. The first few days at the ranch passed in a strange sort of limbo. Evangeline helped Mrs. Chen with household tasks, learning the rhythms of the place. The housekeeper was efficient and kind, teaching her how Kieran liked his coffee, where supplies were kept, and sharing stories about the ranch's history. Mr. York's father started this place with nothing but determination and a good horse, Mrs. Chen explained as they kneaded bread dough together on the third morning. Built it up from scratch. Kieran inherited it last winter when his parents passed, and he has been working himself half to death ever since, trying to honor their legacy. Evangeline watched through the kitchen window as Kieran worked with a young horse in the corral, patient and methodical in his movements. He was good with the animal, she had noticed, firm but never cruel, rewarding progress with encouragement rather than force. "He never married?" she asked, trying to sound casual. Mrs. Chen smiled knowingly. "There was a girl a few years back, banker's daughter from Stockton. Pretty thing, but she took one look at ranch life and decided she wanted nothing to do with it. Broke his heart, though he did not show it much. Since then, he has been focused on the ranch and not much else." "That must be lonely." "Very lonely, I imagine. Which is why I was glad when he came back with you." Mrs. Chen gave her a pointed look. "Not that I am presuming anything, you understand, but it is nice to have another woman around, and Mr. York has been smiling more these past few days than he has in months." Evangeline felt her cheeks warm. She had noticed the same thing, though she tried not to read too much into it. Kieran was unfailingly polite and respectful, never pushing or presuming, but there was something in the way he looked at her sometimes, a warmth that had nothing to do with obligation or pity. On the fourth evening, he asked if she would like to ride out to see more of the property. They saddled horses as the worst heat of the day faded and rode north into the rolling hills that bordered his land. "This has been in my family for almost 20 years, Kieran said as they paused on a rise that overlooked the ranch. "My father used to bring me up here when I was a boy and tell me stories about building this place, about the struggles and the triumphs, the lean years and the good ones. It must be hard managing it all alone," Evangeline said. "Some days more than others. Tommy and Daniel are good men, but at the end of the day, the decisions all fall on me." He turned to look at her. "How are you settling in? Has Mrs. Chen been treating you well?" "She has been wonderful. Everyone has." Evangeline met his eyes. "You have all been kinder to me than I had any right to expect." "You have every right to expect basic human decency, Miss Sullivan. The fact that you think kindness is more than you deserve tells me your aunt treated you even worse than I suspected." The anger in his voice was on her behalf, and something about that made her throat tighten. She was not a kind woman, but I survived. "You did more than survive. You kept your spirit intact. That takes strength." Kieran's horse shifted beneath him. and he steadied it with practiced ease. "I wanted to talk to you about something. It has been 4 days, and I know I said to take a week, but I have been thinking." Evangeline's stomach clenched. Here it was, the real expectation, the price she would be asked to pay. "Go on." "If you decide to stay, I would like to offer you a partnership in the ranch." Whatever she had been expecting, it was not that. "What?" "Mrs. Chen manages the house beautifully, but she is getting older, and the work is becoming too much for her. Tommy and Daniel are excellent with the cattle and horses, but neither of them has a head for the business side of things. I need someone who can help manage the operation, handle the books, maybe even expand into some breeding programs I have been considering, someone I can trust and rely on." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "I think you could be that person, if you were interested." "You barely know me," Evangeline protested. "How can you offer me a partnership in your family's ranch?" "I am a good judge of character. These past few days I have watched you work. You are smart, capable, and you do not shy away from hard tasks. You ask good questions and learn fast. Plus, you're not afraid to speak your mind, which is a quality I value highly." His gray eyes were serious. "I am not asking you to marry me or promising anything beyond a business arrangement. But if you stay, I would compensate you fairly and give you a real stake in this place. A percentage of the profits, your name on the deed eventually, the whole thing legal and proper." It was an extraordinary offer, the kind of opportunity women rarely received, especially women in her position. Evangeline felt hope unfurling in her chest, fragile and almost painful in its intensity. "Why would you do this?" "Because I need the help, and you need a future. Seems like we could help each other." He smiled slightly. "Besides, I like you. You make Mrs. Chen laugh, you are not afraid of hard work, and you have not run screaming from the ranch yet, which shows remarkable fortitude." She found herself laughing despite the seriousness of the conversation. "The bar is set very low, apparently." "In my experience, staying power is underrated." He grew serious again. "Think about it. You still have 3 days left in our original agreement. No pressure, no expectations, just an offer to consider." They rode back to the ranch as twilight painted the sky in shades of gold and purple. Evangeline's mind whirled with possibilities. A partnership meant security, independence, a future she could control. It also meant staying here, working closely with Kieran York, and navigating whatever complicated feelings were already starting to develop between them. Because she could not deny it anymore. She was attracted to him, drawn to his quiet strength and genuine kindness. The way he moved, the sound of his laugh, the careful consideration he gave to everyone around him. She caught herself watching for him throughout the day, noticed how her mood lifted when he walked into a room. It was dangerous, letting herself feel anything. She had learned to protect herself by staying detached, by never depending on anyone. But Kieran was making that increasingly difficult. That night at supper, Daniel mentioned that there would be a dance in Knight's Ferry the following Saturday. "Whole town turns out," he explained to Evangeline. "Music, food, good time all around. You should come, miss." "I do not know," she began, but Kieran cut in. "You should go. Do you good to meet some of the other folks around here? And Daniel is right, the dances are a good time." He hesitated. "I would be honored if you would allow me to escort you." Mrs. Chen was watching with barely concealed interest, and Tommy was grinning into his coffee. Evangeline felt herself blushing, but could not quite suppress her smile. "I would like that." "Settled then. We will head into town Saturday afternoon." The days leading up to the dance passed quickly. Evangeline threw herself into ranch work, learning the books and starting to understand the complex web of expenses and income that kept the operation running. Kieran was patient in teaching her, sitting beside her at the big desk in his office as he explained breeding records and market prices. "You have a natural head for numbers," he said approvingly, as she quickly calculated potential profits from a horse sale. "Better than mine, honestly, I can manage, but it does not come easy." "My father taught me. He said a woman needed to understand money if she was going to survive in this world." The memory was bittersweet, one of the good times before everything fell apart. Your father was a wise man. Kieran's shoulder brushed hers as he reached for a ledger, and she felt the contact like a spark of electricity. They had been growing closer, she realized. Small touches, lingering looks, conversations that stretched long into the evening. Mrs. Chen had taken to retiring early, leaving them alone in the sitting room where they talked about everything from childhood memories to dreams for the future. What would you do if you could do anything? Kieran asked one night, his long legs stretched out toward the fireplace. I used to dream about having a horse ranch, Evangeline admitted. My father talked about it before he got sick. He loved horses, said they were the most honest creatures God ever made. He was right about that. Kieran was quiet for a moment. That dream does not have to be dead, you know. If you stayed, if you took the partnership, we could expand the horse operation. I have been wanting to do more with breeding, maybe specialize in good working horses. Could be your project, if you wanted. The possibility shimmered between them, beautiful and terrifying. You barely know me, she said again. But the protest was weaker now. I know enough. I know you are kind to Mrs. Chen and patient with the animals. I know you work hard and do not complain. I know you make me laugh and challenge my thinking and look beautiful in the lamplight. The last words came out softer, almost wondering. Evangeline's breath caught. Kieran, sorry, overstepped. But he did not look sorry and he did not look away. No, you did not. This is all very fast and I do not want to make a mistake. Life does not come with guarantees, Evangeline. Sometimes you just have to trust your instincts and take a chance. He stood, offering his hand to help her up. Come on, early day tomorrow, and I want to show you the new foals in the morning. Saturday arrived bright and clear, perfect weather for the dance. Evangeline dressed in the nicest thing she owned, a blue cotton dress that had belonged to her mother. It was simple but well made, and Mrs. Chen had helped her add some fresh ribbon trim to brighten it up. You look lovely, the housekeeper said approvingly. Mr. York will not be able to take his eyes off you. It is just a dance, Evangeline protested, but her heart was racing. Kieran was waiting by the wagon, dressed in clean denim and a white shirt that made his tanned skin seem even darker by contrast. His hair was neatly combed, and he had trimmed his beard. When he saw her, his whole face lit up. You look beautiful, he said simply, and offered his hand to help her into the wagon. The ride to Knight's Ferry took about an hour, and they filled it with comfortable conversation. Evangeline found herself relaxing, laughing at his stories about ranch mishaps and sharing her own memories of better times. The dance was held in the town's largest building, a general assembly hall that served multiple purposes. When they arrived, music was already spilling out into the street, fiddles and a piano creating a lively melody that made feet want to move. Inside, it seemed like half of Stanislaus County had turned out. Families clustered together, young people flirted and danced, and older folks sat on benches around the perimeter exchanging news and gossip. Evangeline tensed when she spotted her aunt across the room, but Martha Sullivan took one look at her niece's face, sniffed disdainfully, and turned away. Small mercies. Ignore her, Kieran murmured, his hand warm at the small of her back. She has no power over you anymore. He was right, Evangeline realized with sudden clarity. Her aunt could not hurt her, could not control her, could not sell her like property. That chapter of her life was over. Dance with me, Kieran said, and it was not quite a question. She let him lead her onto the floor, and when his arms circled her waist, it felt like the most natural thing in the world. He was a good dancer, confident without being showy, guiding her through the steps with easy grace. You have done this before, she said. My mother insisted I learn. Said any man worth his salt should know how to dance and treat a lady properly. His eyes crinkled at the corners when he smiled. She was big on proper manners, even out here in the middle of nowhere. They danced 3 songs in a row before taking a break for refreshments. Daniel appeared with a friend in tow, a pretty girl named Sarah who worked at the hotel, and they chatted for a while about nothing important. It felt normal and easy, like Evangeline belonged here, like she had found her place. As the evening wore on, she found herself back in Kieran's arms more often than not. Other men asked her to dance, and she accepted to be polite, but her eyes kept finding him across the room, and his eyes were always already on her. "People are going to talk," she said, as they swayed to a slower melody, pressed closer together than was strictly proper. "Let them talk. I am past caring what people think." His hand tightened slightly on her waist. "Evangeline, these past 2 weeks, having you at the ranch, I have not felt this alive in months, maybe longer." "I feel the same," she admitted, the words spilling out before she could stop them. "I know it is too soon, and I know I should be more careful, but when I'm with you I feel safe, happy, like maybe everything that happened before was leading me here." Maybe it was. They had stopped dancing, just standing together in the middle of the crowded floor. "I was not looking for this for you. But now that you are here, I cannot imagine the ranch without you, cannot imagine my life without you in it." "Kieran, I need to know. Is this just because I am convenient? Because I am there and available and you are lonely?" "No." The word was fierce and immediate. "This is because you are smart and strong and beautiful, because you make me want to be better. Do better, because when you smile, it feels like the sun coming out after a storm." He cupped her face gently with one calloused hand. "This is because I am falling in love with you, Evangeline Sullivan, and I think I have been since the moment I saw you standing in that store, refusing to let your aunt break your spirit." Her heart felt too big for her chest, full of emotion she had been trying to deny. "I am falling in love with you too," she whispered. "I did not want to, tried not to, but I cannot help it." "Then stop trying to help it." He leaned closer, and she could feel his breath against her lips. "Stay with me. Not as an employee or a partner in business. Stay as someone I am courting properly, the way you deserve. Let me show you what it is like to be cherished and respected and loved." "Yes," she breathed, and then his lips were on hers, soft and questioning at first, then deeper as she responded. The room around them faded away, the music and voices becoming distant background noise. There was only this moment, this man, this feeling of coming home to a place she had never been. Someone wolf whistled, breaking the spell, and they pulled apart laughing. Kieran's ears were red, and Evangeline knew she was blushing furiously, but she did not care. Let the whole town see. Let them know that she had found something real and good and worth fighting for. They stayed at the dance until nearly midnight, talking and laughing with neighbors and friends. Evangeline met what felt like half the county, and everyone was welcoming and kind. Not because they pitied her, she realized, but because they genuinely liked Kieran and were happy to see him happy. On the ride home, she dozed against his shoulder, exhausted and content. When they reached the ranch, he insisted on walking her to the door like a proper gentleman, even though they had already scandalized the town with their kiss. "Thank you for tonight," she said. "For everything, really. You gave me back my life, Kieran." "You did that yourself. I just opened a door." He tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, the gesture tender and intimate. "Sleep well, Evangeline. Tomorrow we can start planning the horse breeding program you want. Make those dreams real." She stood on her toes and kissed him again, quick and sweet. "Good night, Kieran York. Thank you for being exactly who you are." The next months passed in a blur of work and joy and deepening love. Evangeline threw herself into the ranch operations, proving to have an excellent eye for horses and a sharp mind for business. Under her management, they began building a reputation for quality breeding stock, and buyers started coming from as far away as San Francisco. Kieran courted her properly, with flowers picked from the hillsides and picnics by the river. They rode out together in the evenings, talking about everything and nothing, building a foundation of friendship beneath the growing passion. He was patient and respectful, never pushing for more than she was ready to give, and that restraint only made her love him more. Mrs. Chen watched their courtship with approval, offering advice and chaperonage when needed. Tommy and Daniel became protective older brothers, making sure Evangeline knew they would support whatever decision she made. By October, when the first cool winds began blowing down from the Sierra Nevada, Evangeline knew with absolute certainty what she wanted. She found Kieran in the barn one evening, brushing down his gelding after a long day. "I have been thinking," she said without preamble. He looked up, a smile already forming. "About? About what you said at the dance. About courting me properly and doing things right." She stepped closer, laying her hand on his chest where she could feel his heart beating strong and steady. "I appreciate the sentiment truly, but I think we have waited long enough." His eyes darkened with understanding and desire. "Are you sure?" "I am sure that I love you. I am sure that I want to spend my life with you, building this ranch and raising horses and maybe someday raising children too. I am sure that you are the best man I have ever known, and I do not want to waste another day being careful when we could be living." She took a deep breath. "Marry me, Kieran York." He laughed, the sound full of joy and surprise. "I am supposed to be the one asking." "Then ask." He set down the brush carefully, then dropped to one knee right there in the barn. Taking her hand in both of his, he looked up at her with those steady gray eyes that had captured her heart. "Evangeline Sullivan, you walked into my life like a storm, unexpected and powerful and impossible to ignore. You challenged me, inspired me, made me believe in the possibility of love again. Would you do me the extraordinary honor of becoming my wife?" "Yes," she said, pulling him to his feet. "Yes, absolutely, yes." They were married 3 weeks later in a simple ceremony at the ranch. The whole community turned out, filling the house and yard with warmth and celebration. Mrs. Chen cried happy tears, and Tommy made an embarrassingly heartfelt toast. Daniel caught the garter and blushed furiously when Sarah laughed. Even Aunt Martha showed up, though whether it was to judge or to assuage some buried guilt, Evangeline could not tell. She greeted the woman politely but coldly, and Kieran stayed protectively close until Martha finally left, muttering about ungrateful nieces. "You handled that with grace," Kieran murmured, as they watched her aunt's wagon disappear down the road. "She has no power to hurt me anymore. I have everything I need right here." Evangeline turned into his embrace, feeling his arms come around her strong and sure. Their wedding night was everything she had dreamed and more, tender and passionate and full of whispered promises. Kieran was gentle and patient, making sure she felt cherished and desired in equal measure. They fit together perfectly, two broken pieces made whole. The years that followed were not always easy. Ranch life never was. There were droughts that tested their resources, hard winters that took livestock, and the constant challenges of building a business in an unpredictable land. But through it all, they had each other. Evangeline proved to be a brilliant businesswoman, expanding their horse breeding program and establishing contracts with the Army and several large ranches. Her father's dream became reality under her capable management, and the York Ranch became known throughout California for quality horses and fair dealing. Kieran supported her ambitions fully, never threatened by her success, but proud of everything she accomplished. They were true partners in every sense, making decisions together and building their future as a team. Their first child, a boy they named Caden, was born in the spring of 1883. He had his father's gray eyes and his mother's stubborn determination, and from the moment he could walk, he was following them around the ranch, learning the business from the ground up. 2 years later, a daughter arrived, Eden, with dark curls and a laugh that could light up the darkest day. She had her mother's head for numbers and her father's gentle way with animals, a combination that would serve her well. Mrs. Chen stayed with them until she passed peacefully in her sleep in 1889, having lived long enough to see both children through their early years. They mourned her deeply, but celebrated the life she had lived and the love she had given their family. Tommy and Daniel remained fixtures at the ranch. eventually bringing families of their own to the property as Kieran and Evangeline expanded operations. What started as a one-family ranch became a small community, bound together by mutual respect and shared purpose. On their 10th anniversary, Kieran took Evangeline back to the hilltop where he had first offered her the partnership that changed both their lives. They sat on their horses, watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant colors, while their children played in the grass nearby. "Do you ever regret it?" he asked. "Staying here instead of taking the money and starting fresh somewhere else?" Evangeline looked at him. This man who had saved her not with grand gestures, but with simple respect and unwavering kindness. "Not for a single moment. You gave me the greatest gift anyone could give. You gave me a choice, and then you made me glad I chose you." "I am the one who should be grateful," Kieran said, reaching over to take her hand. "You took a broken man who was just going through the motions and reminded him what it meant to truly live. You built this ranch into something beyond anything my parents could have imagined. You gave me children and love and a life worth living." "We built it together," she corrected. "Everything we have, we made as partners." "The best decision I ever made was walking into that store," Kieran said. "The second best was having the courage to ask you to stay." "The best decision I ever made was saying yes." Evangeline squeezed his hand. "To the partnership, to the marriage, to this life we built from nothing but trust and love." They sat in comfortable silence as the sun disappeared behind the western hills, casting long shadows across their land. Caden and Eden ran up the hill, breathless and laughing, and climbed up onto the horses with their parents. "Tell us again how you met," Eden demanded, as she always did. She never tired of the story, of how her father had rescued her mother, and how they had fallen in love. "Well," Evangeline began, settling her daughter more comfortably in front of her, "it was a very hot day in August, and your mother was in quite a bit of trouble." "Because mean Aunt Martha was bad," Caden supplied, having heard the story dozens of times. "That's right, but then your father came along, and he was brave and kind, and he changed everything." "I was not all that brave," Kieran protested, as he always did. "I just did what needed doing." "You were brave," Evangeline insisted, meeting his eyes over their children's heads. "You saw someone who needed help, and you helped. Not because you expected anything in return, but because it was right. That is the truest form of courage." They rode back to the ranch house as twilight deepened tonight. Their children chattering excitedly about horses and school and all the small dramas of young lives. The house came into view, windows glowing with warm lamplight, smoke curling from the chimney. Home, in every sense of the word. That night, after the children were tucked into bed and the house had settled into quiet, Kieran and Evangeline sat on the porch, rocking gently in the chairs Tommy had built them as an anniversary gift. "Do you think they understand how lucky we are?" Evangeline asked, resting her head on Kieran's shoulder. "They will someday, when they're older and they realize how rare it is to find what we have." He pressed a kiss to her temple. True partnership, real love, the kind of respect and trust that builds something lasting. "I want that for them, for both our children. I want them to know they deserve to be treated well, to be valued and respected." "We will teach them by example," Kieran said, "by showing them every day what love is supposed to look like." As the years continued to pass, that was exactly what they did. Caden grew into a young man who treated everyone with his father's quiet courtesy. Eden became a woman who knew her worth and refused to settle for less than she deserved. Both children understood that their mother's story was not one of victimhood, but of survival and triumph, of choosing to build something beautiful from the ashes of loss. The ranch continued to thrive under the York family's management. They weathered economic panics and changing markets, adapted to new technologies while maintaining the core values that had built the operation. Other ranchers sought their advice, and their breeding program became legendary throughout the West. But more than their business success, Kieran and Evangeline built a reputation for fairness and compassion. They employed people others might overlook, giving chances to those who needed them most. They donated horses to families struggling to start farms, and contributed to building schools and churches throughout the county. We were given a second chance, Evangeline explained to a journalist who came to interview them for a San Francisco paper in 1895. Both of us. My husband's parents gave him a foundation of love and opportunity. My husband gave me freedom when I had none. It would be ungrateful not to pass that forward. The article painted them as model citizens and progressive thinkers and brought even more attention to their operation, but the fame never changed who they were at their core. They remained the same people who had found each other in a dusty general store, two souls recognizing something essential in each other. On their 20th anniversary, their children threw them a party that brought together everyone whose lives they had touched over the years. Former employees who had gone on to start their own ranches, young couples who had met at York Ranch gatherings, children who had learned to ride on horses Evangeline had bred. "Look at what you built," Kieran said, holding Evangeline close as they surveyed the crowd filling their property. Not just a ranch, but a community, a legacy. "We built it," she corrected automatically, then smiled. "Though I suppose after 20 years you should know I am never going to let you shoulder credit or blame alone. One of the many reasons I love you." He kissed her softly, not caring who saw. "You keep me honest." That night, long after the guests had departed and the house had quieted, they lay together in the darkness of their bedroom, bodies intertwined with the easy comfort of long familiarity. "Do you remember that first night," Evangeline asked, "when you brought me here and gave me the guest room and I was so sure there had to be a catch? I remember. You looked at me like I might sprout horns at any moment." Kieran's laugh rumbled through his chest. "Took you nearly a week to stop watching the door whenever I walked into a room. Can you blame me? Men did not behave the way you did. They did not offer partnerships and ask nothing in return." "I asked for plenty in return," he protested. "I asked you to work hard and be honest and help me build something worthwhile. Pretty significant asks if you think about it." "Those were not asks. Those were invitations to be my best self." She propped herself up on one elbow, studying his face in the moonlight streaming through the window. Even after 20 years, the sight of him still made her heart race. "You never asked me to be less than I was. You encouraged me to be more. Do you know how rare that is? I just loved you." "Love you," he corrected. Present tense, forever tense. "Forever tense," she repeated, liking the sound of it. "Yes, that is exactly right." The seasons continued their endless cycle, and the York family continued to grow and thrive. Caden married a teacher from Sacramento, a smart woman named Julia, who shared his parents' values. They settled in a house on the southern portion of the property and began raising their own family. Eden surprised everyone by falling in love with an artist from San Francisco, a gentleman named Oliver, who captured the beauty of ranch life in paintings that sold in galleries across the country. They split their time between the city and Knight's Ferry, and Eden managed the breeding program's expansion into Southern California while Oliver painted. "Never in a million years did I imagine our daughter marrying an artist," Kieran said, watching Oliver sketch one of the foals with quick, confident strokes. "Why not? He makes her happy, treats her well, and supports her ambitions. Those are the things that matter." Evangeline leaned against the corral fence, content. "Besides, his paintings have been wonderful for business. Half the people who commission horses from us first saw them in his work." "True enough. Your father would have approved, I think." "My father would have loved both our children and their choices," Evangeline said softly. "He would have loved this whole life we built, would have been proud. He would have been proud of you most of all, the way you took tragedy and turned it into triumph, the way you never let hardship make you hard." Kieran put his arm around her shoulders. "I am proud of you every single day. Even when I disagree with you about which horses to breed, especially then, keeps me sharp." They laughed together, the sound carrying across the ranch yards where 3 generations now worked side by side. The legacy they had built was not just financial or professional. It was a legacy of love, freely given, of choices freely made, of treating every person with dignity and respect regardless of their circumstances. In the summer of 1901, they celebrated their 25th anniversary with a quiet dinner, just the two of them. The children had wanted to throw another party, but Kieran and Evangeline had insisted on something more intimate. 25 years, Evangeline mused, swirling wine in her glass. Sometimes it feels like yesterday we met, and sometimes it feels like we have always been together. Both are true in a way. The years pass quickly, but the life we have built is so solid it feels timeless. Kieran raised his glass. To 25 more. To 25 more, she echoed, clinking her glass against his, and to the cowboy who had more and better intentions than anyone had a right to expect. To the woman who was brave enough to trust those intentions and build something beautiful from them. They drank and talked, and eventually made their way to the porch where they had spent countless evenings over the years. The stars wheeled overhead in their ancient patterns, indifferent to human joys and sorrows. But here, in this small corner of California, two people had found something worth celebrating. I never thanked you properly, Evangeline said suddenly, for that day in the general store, for seeing me when I was invisible to everyone else. You were never invisible, love. You were incandescent with suppressed fire, impossible to miss. Kieran pulled her closer. I just happened to be looking at the right moment. Lucky for both of us you were. Luckiest moment of my life. They sat in comfortable silence, hands intertwined, hearts beating in the synchronized rhythm of long partnership. Two people who had found each other against all odds and built something that would outlast them both. The ranch would continue through their children and grandchildren, each generation adding their own touches while maintaining the core values of honesty, hard work, and compassion. The breeding program would evolve with changing times, but always with an eye toward quality and ethics. The land would be stewarded carefully, preserved for future generations. But more than any of that, the story of Kieran and Evangeline York would be told and retold, a reminder that sometimes the greatest love stories begin with the simplest act of human decency. That seeing another person's worth and choosing to honor it can change not just two lives, but create ripples that spread outward into the world. Years later, when their great-grandchildren asked about the early days, about how the ranch began and how their great-grandparents met, the stories would still carry the same essential truth. A young woman who refused to be broken by circumstance, a young man who chose compassion over indifference, two people who found in each other not just love, but true partnership. As Evangeline and Kieran grew older, they never lost the spark that had drawn them together that hot August day in 1881. They still rode out together in the evenings, still debated ranch business with passionate intensity, still looked at each other with the wonder of people who could not quite believe their good fortune. In their later years, they would sit on that same porch, watching their grandchildren play in the yard, and marvel at how much had grown from such humble beginnings. A ranch that employed dozens, a breeding program known worldwide, a family bound by love and respect, a community that looked to them as examples of what marriage and partnership could be. Not bad for a girl who was sold like cattle, Evangeline said one evening, her voice carrying the self-deprecating humor that had sustained her through so much. Not bad for the cowboy who was smart enough to see her value, Kieran replied as he always did. Better intentions indeed, she murmured, and kissed him as the sun set on another day of their shared life. And when they were very old, when the new century had truly taken hold and automobiles were starting to replace horses on the roads, they still held hands like newlyweds, still finished each other's sentences, still looked at each other as if they were the most fascinating people in the world, because to them they were. They had lived through triumph and tragedy, through joy and hardship, through every test that life could throw at them, and they had emerged not just intact but stronger, their love deepened and refined by the years. The story of how they met became family legend, told to every new generation. The aunt who tried to sell Evangeline like property, the businessman with his predatory intentions, the young cowboy who stepped in and changed everything with a simple offer, the partnership that became a courtship, that became a marriage, that became a legacy. Remember, Evangeline would tell her granddaughters, "You are never for sale. Your worth is inherent, not determined by others, and the person who truly loves you will see that worth and honor it, not try to diminish or control it." Remember, Kieran would tell his grandsons, real strength is not in domination, but in respect. True love is built on partnership and equality. Treat your wives as you would want your mother or sisters treated, and you will never go wrong. These lessons, lived out daily in how they treated each other, shaped generations. The York family became known not just for their business acumen, but for the way they conducted themselves, the values they upheld, the example they set. And it all traced back to that moment in the general store when Kieran York looked at a young woman in distress and made a choice. Not the easy choice, not the expected choice, but the right one. To see her humanity, to honor her autonomy, to offer her what she most needed: options, respect, and eventually love. Evangeline Sullivan, who became Evangeline York, never forgot what it felt like to be powerless. She spent the rest of her life ensuring that others, particularly women in difficult circumstances, had the resources and support she had been given. The ranch became known as a place where women fleeing bad situations could find temporary refuge and help starting over. Paying it forward, she called it, when people asked why she took such risks helping strangers. Kieran supported every one of these endeavors, never questioning her judgment, always trusting that she knew what she was doing. Because he had learned early that his wife was not just his equal, but in many ways his superior, and he was secure enough in himself to celebrate rather than resent that fact. Their marriage became the standard against which others in the community measured their own. When young couples struggled, they were sent to talk to the Yorks. When divorce seemed imminent, friends suggested considering how Kieran and Evangeline navigated disagreements. When someone asked what love looked like in practice, people pointed to the ranch north of Knight's Ferry, where two people had built something extraordinary from the ashes of hardship. In the end, that was their truest legacy. Not the horses or the land or the money, though all of those were significant. Their real legacy was the proof that love could be a choice, deliberately made and constantly renewed. That partnership could be equal and fair. That seeing another person's worth and choosing to honor it could create something beautiful and lasting. On a spring morning in 1915, Evangeline York passed away peacefully in her sleep at the age of 53, her husband's hand clasped in hers. She had lived long enough to see the ranch thriving under the care of her children, to meet several great-grandchildren, to know that everything she and Kieran had built would continue. Kieran followed her less than a year later, on a fall evening when the leaves were turning gold and red. He had spent the intervening months maintaining the ranch, spending time with family, but everyone could see that part of him had left with Evangeline. They had been two halves of a whole for so long that existence without her seemed merely going through motions. They were buried side by side on the hilltop where he had first told her about his parents, where they had shared so many sunsets, where they had taught their children to appreciate the land they were privileged to steward. The headstone was simple, bearing their names and dates, and a quote Evangeline had chosen years earlier: "Here lie two souls who chose each other freely and loved each other well." The ranch continued, as they had always intended. Caden and Julia took over primary management, with Eden and Oliver handling the artistic and promotional aspects. The breeding program expanded and evolved with changing times, but always maintained the ethical standards Evangeline had established. The house where Kieran and Evangeline had raised their family, where they had loved and argued and laughed and built a life, remained at the heart of the operation. New generations grew up within its walls, learning the stories of their ancestors, understanding the legacy they had inherited, and always the tale of how it began was told with reverence and love. The young woman sold by her aunt, the cowboy who stepped in with better intentions, the partnership that became a marriage that changed not just two lives but countless others. Because that was the truth of Kieran and Evangeline York. They had started with nothing but each other and built something that lasted. They had faced every challenge as partners, celebrated every triumph as equals, and loved each other with a depth and constancy that became legendary. They had proven that love did not have to be complicated to be profound, that kindness was not weakness but strength, that treating another person with respect and dignity could create something more valuable than all the gold in California. Their story became the foundation upon which generations built their own lives and loves. And long after they were gone, when people spoke of the York Ranch, they did not just talk about horses and land and business success. They talked about two people who loved each other well, treated each other fairly, and showed the world what marriage could be when built on mutual respect and genuine partnership. In the end, that was everything. It was the whole story, the complete picture, the legacy that mattered most. Not what they owned or earned or accomplished in business, though all of that was significant. What mattered was how they loved, how they treated each other and everyone around them, how they chose every day to honor the promises they had made. Kieran York had seen a woman in need and helped her because it was right. Evangeline Sullivan had chosen to trust when trust seemed impossible, to love when love seemed dangerous. Together they had built something beautiful and lasting, a testament to the power of human decency and the transformative nature of real love. And in the years that followed, whenever someone asked what the secret was to their success, the family would always give the same answer. There was no secret. Just two people who saw each other clearly, valued each other highly, and chose each other daily, who treated their promises as sacred and their partnership as precious, who understood that real love was not about grand gestures, but about consistent everyday choices to honor and cherish each other. That was the story of Kieran and Evangeline York. That was their legacy, and it endured long after they were gone. A reminder that sometimes the greatest love stories begin with the simplest choice, to see another person's humanity and honor it with your own.